At this Last Supper, Jesus gathers the disciples and says, "My hour has come." What they've been waiting for is here. So what does he take into his hands? A sword? A king's scepter? No, he takes into his hands a humble towel and washes the disciples' feet. John chapter 13 is packed with meaning. Don and I got together and discussed the first section, the first half of chapter 13. We're going to study it and discuss it on Wednesday. So read it, listen to our discussion, consider some of the things that God would be teaching you through John chapter 13.
Jesus is realizing, of course, he already knew it, but the time has come, the hour has come. This is something he's talked about earlier in John's Gospel. My hour has not yet come. What's going on here? Now the hour has come. He loves his own unto the end, it says here. Yeah. And so what we're about to see in these verses is a very late expression of profound love for the men that he spent 3 years with.
Yeah.
And chose.
So if you were spending the evening eating a meal, sharing a meal with your closest friends, and you knew you would die the next day, and you wanted to show them that you loved them, you wanted to communicate the deepest truths, what would you do? And this is what Jesus does.
That's what he does, and what he tells us we ought to do as well, as an example that he sets for us. But what is one of the fascinating things about this is Jesus, in verse 3, it says, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands.
Okay.
What does he do? Does he take a scepter?
He doesn't ascend to a place of dominance. What he does instead is he humbles himself because he's confident in that knowledge.
And what he takes into his hands is a towel and the feet of his friends.
Yeah, not a scepter. Not an object of kingship or judgment, but objects of service. What you know impacts what you do, and what Jesus knew about himself impacted what he did. So he takes into his hands a towel. He literally takes into his hands his disciples' feet. Verse 5, then he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and wipe them with the towel that was wrapped around him. Well, what's going on here, Don?
It's something that doesn't just meet the eye. Peter asks him an interesting question in verse 6, a very simple question.
Yeah.
Does Jesus give him a very simple answer? Oh, no.
Verse 6, he came to Simon Peter, who said to him, Lord, do you wash my feet? What's wrong with this question? Is it...
Nothing's wrong
with the question?
No, it's a very simple question, but Jesus has a lot going on.
Okay.
A lot beneath the surface or beyond what is an appearance there. It says, you don't know now. You'll know later. And that suggests to me that what he's doing has a lot more meaning to Jesus himself than getting rid of some dirt.
Knowing what he's doing and understanding what he's doing, this can grow over time. They don't really fully understand it right now. Does this have any parallel? Would you say that God has done things in your life that at the time you knew this much about what he was doing? Over time, you actually knew more about what he had been doing in that moment.
I was in law school and I was applying for jobs, and I had marvelous job interviews.
Yeah.
With a number of big firms that would pay me top dollar, Yeah. And I remember one of the partners says, I will be shocked if we don't make you a job offer. They didn't make me a job offer. None of them made me a job offer. And I remember thinking, God must be fighting against me on this. And that's crazy, but he must be fighting against me. because otherwise one of these 10 good interviews would
Pan out.
yeah. And sometime later, I saw, he was. He didn't want me to take those jobs.
Yeah.
He had something else in mind, something better. And now I appreciate that, but I didn't at the time.
Yeah. Yeah. So, the general principle, God is doing something that we don't quite wrap our heads around. That bears out all the time. But in this specific case, Peter could not wrap his head around the supposed top guy lowering himself to do the most menial job. That was an upside down way of interacting with people. And so that seems to me, this is the really specific thing that Peter does not understand. He says, Lord, do you wash my feet? So clearly Peter questions him. And I thought about that. What a disagreement. Lord, as in, I unquestionably consider you to be in charge. Lord, now let me question you.
Peter has a history of this. After he had made his great confession of Jesus as the Messiah, then Jesus started talking about, I'm going to go to the cross.
Yeah.
And Peter took him aside and started straightening him out. That's not for you. Jesus straightened Peter out.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, when I was reading this, I thought, have I said this to the Lord? Lord, of course you're in charge, but there's some things that you're not allowed to do to me. And Peter says, verse 8, Peter said to him, you shall never wash my feet, which sounds like piety. Sounds like piety. I'll never let you wash my feet. It's beneath you. But it's a kind of boast to say, I call the shots and not you, God.
He mentions, if I don't wash you, you have no part in it. So this is essential. You've got to submit to this. And then Peter, of course, then do me better than you do all of these others.
Right.
I'm really humble. I
That's
want you to wash all of me. And Jesus says, no, Peter, we're going to do this my way. This is not an optional thing.
Yeah.
When I was first looking at this, I was looking at, this is unnecessary. Jesus didn't need to do this. Oh, yes, he did. They needed that to be done to them, because they weren't. And then he talks about, you're not all clean. This will make you clean, but then you're not all clean. And then John in verse 11 talks about Judas.
Yeah.
So Jesus is clearly talking about something other than just dirt and feet. He's talking about a deeper cleaning that is vastly more important. And Judas had a role to play, but the devil was involved here too. A couple of times here in this chapter, it talks about Satan is grabbing a hold of Judas.
Yeah.
And so Judas was like Peter in the sense of, I've got a better idea.
Yeah.
But he took it to another level.
Yeah. I think Judas and Peter are very similar. They have sort of a parallel story that ends differently. There's some key reasons it ends differently, but they both, you could say, betray or deny. They're not exactly the same thing, but
Pretty close.
Pretty close. They both had their own idea about what Jesus should be doing, and had their own methods for manipulating that. And Jesus had really strong words of correction for both of them.
They both repented. One repented to Jesus, and one repented to the chief priests. And Jesus forgave, and the chief priests said,
They did not.
What's that to us?
Yeah, no mercy. The law gives no mercy. What did we learn? Just at in John chapter 1, the law was given through Moses, but grace and truth came through Jesus Christ.